Good morning, and welcome to Harvard Climate Action Week at the studio. I'm Diana Sharpe, Associate Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Environmental Science and Public Policy program. Today, Harvard Climate Action Week is fully virtual and gives Harvard students, recent alumni, and researchers a chance to share their expertise on a diverse range of topics. We're here today at Harvard DCE's Brattle Square studio. We'd like to thank the Division of Continuing Education and its Emerging Technology Solutions team for hosting our sessions this year. For those of you who are just joining us, I'd like to share a little more about this week of events and what the Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability and the Climate Action Accelerator do. The mission of the Salata Institute is to develop and promote durable, effective, and equitable solutions to the climate change challenges confronting humanity. The Institute serves as a fulcrum for collaboration across Harvard's many areas of expertise. Together, we pursue practical, real-world solutions that address all aspects of the climate crisis. And through the Climate Action Accelerator, we engage directly with governments, businesses, NGOs, and communities to collaboratively implement those solutions. Harvard Climate Action Week is one way that we lean into that mission. 34 Harvard schools and centers have come together this week to highlight the work that they are leading in climate action and to amplify the people, both within this university and our external partners who do that work. Today, you'll hear from 9 members of the Harvard community, students, recent alumni, researchers, and fellows, who will share their capstone and thesis work, talk about their startups, and share their emerging research. These speakers represent Harvard College and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, as well as the Engineering School, the Law School, the Business School, the Extension School, the Kennedy School of Government, and the Graduate School of Design, and students who've worked closely with the Harvard Innovation Labs to develop products to solve aspects of the climate crisis. I hope you'll enjoy these presentations and that they will leave you with a sense of hope that we can solve the climate crisis. So let's get started. This morning's presentations are Brooke Suter, Reverend Devine, and Terri Eickel, who will talk about their work at the intersection of faith and climate change. Weila Gong, who will share her research on climate leadership in Chinese cities. Isabel Varela Gutierrez, who will share her research on the first open source database for geothermal networks. Vivian Cochise, who will show us how phytoplankton can be a climate solution. And finally, Charles Hua, who will share his research on accelerating clean energy and equity through utility regulation. So please join us now for our first presentation of the morning.
Great. Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you to the Salata Institute and everyone across Harvard and all the alumni for the amazing work that's happening on climate. Welcome, everyone, to this seminar. It is the Faith and Climate from Creation Care to Action. My name is Brooke Suter. I'm a Harvard Kennedy School alum and the founder of Sustainable Leadership to Thrive.
I'm Reverend Devine. I am an ordained minister with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and I am the director of the Eco-America faith program called Blessed Tomorrow.
My name is Terri Eickel, and I am the executive director for the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network.
So, what if we could engage 85% of the world's population in climate action? It's estimated that about that number identify with a religion around the world. And Carol and Terri and I are here to share some context and some actionable resources to help you engage with these communities. We will speak from a variety of perspectives. So I as a climate advocate, Carol as a reverend, and Terri as a lay faith leader. So to start with, we want to make sure that when all this is done, you have some resources you can use to move forward. So we thought the most important thing was to provide this first slide and to invite you to take a photo or a screenshot of the slide because it includes a QR code that will provide links to resources that we mentioned throughout the presentation. So you can go back and find those later. when you have more time to digest and to look through information. And we'll provide this QR code again on the last slide at the end. So we'll hold here for a little bit so you can do that if you want. So again, my name is Brooke Suter. I've been an environment and public health activist and advocate for 30 years. And what I found is the key ingredient to winning nationally precedent-setting legislation in the US was building broad-based coalitions. And for me, engaging with the faith communities for the first time in 1990s was particularly inspiring. And Terri Eickel, who will speak more later, was one of those people who brought her faith, her talent as an opera singer, and her innovation together to create a clean air choir. So if you can imagine that, a bunch of amazing singers in the Connecticut legislature singing about clean air, that got the attention of legislators and helped us build the momentum that we needed to clean up the old power plants in a campaign that lasted in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And it's still talked about today. So that kind of innovation and commitment has been really foundational and inspiring to me. So as someone who is not a member of a particular faith community, but who is spiritual, how is it that I initially engaged people from communities of faith? So as an environmental activist, I think the first thing is to be humble and sincere. So I simply walked across the street in the mid-90s to the church that was across the street, and I asked the receptionist if there was anyone there interested in air pollution. And I was invited to present the issue to a small group of people after the service. And then together, those people, we engaged more people and worked together until we won that campaign. So the first and key point I want to make is that with respect, any person who's from any faith affiliation or not affiliated with a religion can talk to anyone else and work together with them if they're interested. Another key point I'd like to make is their opportunities are global and across religious traditions, because of course, Harvard alumni are everywhere. And religious traditions around the world have scripture related to creation care and increasingly to climate action specifically. So there are many resources to help. Carol and Terri are going to provide some of those. In addition, again, with this QR code, you can go to some links to resources. So Terri, next slide, please. So one recent example you may be familiar with is in 2015, Pope Francis released Laudato Si, which is a papal encyclical, and it called for immediate action on climate change. So this was just fabulous, you know. And building on this, Laudato Si has created also a platform, an online platform to provide action resources. Its foundational principles are 7 key goals to provide guidance on urgent and immediate actions each one of us can take in care of our common home. And quoting Pope Francis, it says, all of us can cooperate as instruments of God for the care of creation, each according to his or her own culture, experience, involvements, and talents. So understanding we all come from different places and we can come together where our interests and concerns align. We can engage in education and spirituality, adoption of sustainable lifestyles, ecological economies, and more. So as a climate activist, I was struck by how this sort of image parallels the Sustainable Development Goals, which are secular. So next slide, please. On that secular side, you have the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think many of us are very familiar with, but I also wanted to introduce you to the Inner Development Goals. So these have been created to complement the Sustainable Development Goals. The Inner Development Goals, or IDGs, focus on this idea of nesting at the core this individual self. So being, relationship to oneself. And so if you think about that, that perspective can also be considered spirituality, either within a religious faith or not. So what I'm currently working on with Sacred Heart University is taking all three of these, the idea of the Laudato Si. So Sacred Heart University is traditionally a Catholic university. So Laudato Si, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Inner Development Goals, and really thinking about how do those converge and interact in a way that we can utilize all of this, the spirituality, the faith community, and the secular work that's being done across the world in this emerging Institute for Sustainability and Social Justice at Sacred Heart University. So I'm very inspired by all of this. And what I want to do is pass it off to Reverend Carol Devine to talk more about some of the key ways that she's been working largely within the United States. So take it away, Reverend Carol.
Thanks so much, Brooke. You know, I grew up, fortunately, in a very justice-minded and engaged church. I loved my church, and my faith has always been very important to me. Also, I spent a lot of time as a child at my grandparents' in the mountains of Kentucky in the Appalachian Mountains, running and playing in the hills among the trees and the creek. And I became a tree hugger and then an environmentalist. But my tree hugger self and my faith self were always separate in my mind and heart. I didn't grow up hearing sermons or teachings on the intersection of faith and creation care or climate, or our responsibility to the natural world. So I became a kindergarten teacher, started a kindergarten as a Peace Corps volunteer, and then taught future teachers in the College of Education at a nearby university. And life was good until I strongly felt that I was called to be a minister. So I started seminary with much reluctance. But it was there that my faith and the changing climate and creation care came together in a very profound way in one single moment. And I realized that I needed to help other people of faith make that same connection and to know how to live out their faith through caring for creation and climate justice. Because when we care about the things on this slide, we also must care about climate. Next slide. I served as a pastor in a politically red state to a very purple congregation, while also starting and leading my denomination's creation care and climate program. After 14 years of pastoring 2 congregations in Kentucky, I felt I needed to focus fully on climate and faith. The climate crisis is not a scientific problem. It is a moral problem, and the faith community must prioritize action on climate as a moral and justice issue. So now, as the director of Blessed Tomorrow, the faith program of Eco America, I am blessed to work with incredible faith leaders across the U.S., like the 2 that I'm presenting with today. And I am so honored with Blessed Tomorrow to provide free climate and faith resources, a climate ambassador training, so much support and guidance, and hosting events like the National Faith and Climate Forum in order to support our denominational partners and other faith and climate organizations and leaders. Next slide. Great things are happening, but not quite fast enough. Some denominations do not have a climate program at all, and those that do are mostly underfunded and understaffed. Clergy and congregations need more support to talk about and lead on climate. And research still shows that most people of faith have never heard a sermon or an educational talk on climate and faith. Most still have not had the opportunity to have that aha moment like I had in seminary. So for those reasons, Blessed Tomorrow has convened many faith leaders over almost a year's time to find a solution. And the result is the One Home, One Future multi-faith campaign. Now, 44 multi-faith partner denominations and organizations have come together to support congregations and individuals of faith. Together, we educate, activate, and support clergy, congregants, youth, and all spiritual people in meaningful and just climate solutions in ways that are accessible and positive. Congregations are a vital part of the support network of our local communities. There are more of them than Starbucks or post offices or police departments. They are safe and trusted places for people, particularly in crisis. Congregations are connected in their local towns and cities to leadership, organizations, and other faith communities. We know that when congregations thrive, local communities benefit, and we know that change must happen on the local level. So over to Terri, who works directly with congregations in local communities.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I wanted to speak a little bit about working on the ground with houses of worship individually and how we have been able to expand beyond suburban churches to houses of worship in low income and rural areas. So, one of the first things is when I meet with leaders at a house of worship, I acknowledge that religious communities are already addressing environmental crises, but we are largely reacting to them. People of faith are the largest group of individual givers in times of extreme weather disasters. Religious communities help people who are ill, providing support and childcare and meals. Religious communities have community gardens, soup kitchens, and food pantries to help people who are food insecure and lack access to fresh produce. And many congregations will also help people with basic living expenses so they don't have to choose between paying their electricity bill and buying medication or food. So I always remind people we are already doing this work, but we are reacting to the environmental problems. It's time to get at the root of these crises and incorporate environmental ministry into the tapestry of our religious work. So at IREJN, in our effort to bring more religious communities into this work, we decided to focus our programming on practical programs that address needs in the community while also highlighting the intersection of climate change with other areas of inequity. This provides us with the opportunity to build relationships and increase the network of people of faith who will lift their voice on behalf of the planet. So our first area is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency reduces energy use and energy bills. It reduces carbon emissions. It improves quality of life and has significant health benefits. IREJN helps houses of worship become more energy efficient in their congregational building. Connecticut has great programs for helping nonprofits do that. We also offer small grants to houses of worship that are located in environmental justice communities and distressed municipalities to help offset the cost of that work in their building. And then we also offer to help them organize a weatherization campaign for their members in their actual homes. Helping people become more energy efficient in their house of worship and their home has been extremely successful in providing a path for climate change outreach. The second area we focus on is food justice. IREJN provides small grants and guidance to install or expand vegetable gardens to help people access fresh produce. We started this program last year. We've worked with 3 or 4 congregations right now on traditional vegetable gardens, and which have provided hundreds of pounds of fresh produce to community members in need. Finally, we offer a smaller program to address biodiversity loss and create educational opportunities. So we offer small grants and guidance to install and expand pollinator gardens. These little pollinator gardens are great stepping stone programs for houses of worship that would like to get started on engaging their congregation on the environment, but they don't quite know what project to do. It also helps them beautify their property, and it supports the biodiversity that we all need to thrive. We've found all of these programs to be very successful. They help people. They offer visible, measurable benefits to the house of worship. They offer an entry point to discuss the theological background for caring for the planet. They support, obviously, the environmental care that we need to do, and they help my organization build relationships with different groups. And that relationship building is so important, and it's a very important goal for us because we need to engage religious communities to advocate for strong environmental policy. I appreciated what Brooke had to say in her slide, building from the individual to the organization to the system. A faith journey is a personal journey, and yet we go on this journey with a community of people. We live our values and we make our decisions as a group. I believe so strongly in the power of personal choice to make a difference, but we also need strong policy to make change. So in the past year, we've presented a unified faith voice by submitting sign-on letters and testimony from faith communities on different environmental legislation and regulations. We built a presence at the state capitol in Hartford by holding our first legislative prayer breakfast, where religious leaders from different religious traditions offered prayers on different environmental topics: clean air, clean water, wildlife, the planet, and environmental justice. And in 2024, we're going to continue our advocacy efforts by working to educate a cohort of religious leaders who are highly knowledgeable about climate and energy and willing to meet with legislators. Faith, action, advocacy. 3 important strategies for climate action with the faith community. I would like now to turn it back over to Brooke.
Thanks so much, Terri and Carol, for sharing your wonderful experience. Again, both of you are so inspiring, as are the many, many people across the world who are working on climate and engaging their faith communities to take action. Here again is the QR code. Again, encourage you to take a photograph or a screenshot, get to resources that can help you see how all the different communities of faith are talking about creation care and how that relates to climate change and action and ecology. And in closing, you may or may not know that Harvard actually played a key role in developing some of this connection when John Grimm and Mary Evelyn Tucker in 1995 began a 3-year research project surveying the world's religions and their ecological perspectives with hundreds of scholars. So links to that information is also available on this resource document. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you will be inspired to take action, to continue to communicate with those around you in all the different ways where our spirituality and our commitment to climate action align. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Environment and Natural Resources program at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. Today, I would like to say a few words about my book project titled Climate Leadership in Chinese Cities. Why it is important to look at Chinese cities and also its climate leadership. China is the world's largest carbon emitter, followed by the United States and the European Union. The extent to which China can reduce its carbon emissions will in large determine the future success of global efforts to address climate change. Over 85% of China's carbon emissions come from Chinese cities. Some of the largest metropolitan areas around Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou each hosts over tens of millions population. They became the largest hotspots for greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, the extent to which China can achieve its climate goals largely depends on those cities whether they can become truly low carbon. Despite being the world's largest carbon emitter, Chinese government has pledged climate goals to reach carbon peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. Can China achieve its climate goals? That really depends on local implementation. For a long time, local areas and regions, particularly those governments at city level and township level, have been regarded as the key barriers for inadequate environmental policy implementation. But the national government has introduced a series of policy experimentation to motivate subnational climate engagement, including Low Carbon City Pilot Program, which will be examined together shortly. But before we dive into the specific policy program, let's take a minute to understand the important role of policy experimentation in China. Policy experimentation is a unique policy process in China in which national government delegates substantial leeway to subnational governments at the provincial, municipal, and township levels to encourage them to test new policy solutions to address emerging policy challenges. Successful policy experiments in local areas and regions have informed major policy developments at the national level, including land reforms in the 1950s, China's economic opening up in the 1970s, and China's recent development in the electric vehicle sectors. So let's go back to the specific policy program. We will see, so you probably cannot see the slides right now, but I can describe it to you. So the policy program we will look together is the Low Carbon City Pilot Program. That is the program that introduced by the National Development and Reform Commission since 2010. And over the years, there are 81 Chinese cities being selected as low carbon pilots. So being a low carbon pilot is not just assigned by the national government. Local areas and the regions need to apply with a specific action plan, including target setting for decarbonization initiatives across transportation, building, and industrial sectors. And over the years, we have seen that some cities are doing better than others in initiating and implementing those policy initiatives. Just give you a kind of basic information. Out of those 81 Chinese cities, only 4 4 of them actually introduced the specialized policy like agencies in implementing low carbon policies. And only one of those cities actually introduced a set of evaluation standards to evaluate the outcome performance from low carbon policy experimentation. So my research question is, why some Chinese cities? Yes, so this is the map which shows the regional distribution of low carbon city pilots. So you can see that almost every province has 1 or 2 low carbon city pilots. Then over the years, we see there is a huge regional differences in terms of local policy engagement. Only half of them actually have explicit their carbon peak goals, and very few of them was able to introduce a level of policy institutionalization, which consisting of regulations, standards, and legislations, which are very important to lead to behavior changes and at institutional level and also individual level. So policy experimentation also have been criticized by scholars for lacking of policy institutionalization. So that means sometimes they cannot sustain through the changes in political leadership. So my research question is, why are some Chinese cities doing better than others in initiating and maintaining low carbon city pilot experiments? In order to answer the question, I take a comparative and a qualitative approach. So I selected 4 low carbon cities. They were joining the low carbon city pilot program almost at the same time, but have taken different approaches in terms of their engagement. I went to those city areas, talked with policymakers and policy practitioners across different levels of government. Combined with the policy documents assessed through field trip, I was able to reconstruct the policy-making process in those cities and came up with my own explanation. I called it bridging leadership approach. Right, it's here. So in contrast to existing research, which criticized the lack of policy institutionalization out of low carbon city pilot experiments, my research shows that policy institutionalization does exist, particularly when bridging leadership presents. So in contrast to existing research with a strong emphasis on the role of top leaders, they are usually the mayors and party secretaries at the city level. My research and my approach emphasize the key role of bridge leaders, who are usually the middle-level bureaucrats and have spent their almost entire career in one locality, which enable them to have the ability to see the opportunities for future new policies and also equip them with the ability to mobilize resources, build coalitions with key actors inside and outside the government. So my research emphasized the local bureaucrats are a key source for local policy development and implementation. So here I want to show you 2 cases from my research. One is Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a pioneer case in my study. Shenzhen is a city located adjacent to Hong Kong, has a population of 12 million. Shenzhen is a pioneer as a low-carbon city because over the years, it has established a level of policy institutionalization consisting of legislations on green finance, carbon emission trading system, advanced low-carbon standards for green building, and specialized agencies supervising the policy implementation. All this progress actually started with the bridge leadership centered by the middle-level bureaucrats, Tang. So Tang has a PhD in economics and later joined Shenzhen's municipal government and was promoted to the position of vice mayor when he was in charge of the low-carbon city pilot program's implementation. So Tang, as a bridge leader, was able to mobilize the political willingness from the mayor and create implementation alliance with local actors inside and outside of the government. So one of the successful initiatives led by Tang was Shenzhen's emission trading system, which is a policy mechanism created to mobilize energy resources, very intensive entities, particularly in the industrial sector, to reduce their carbon emissions. Shenzhen was actually not included as a pilot on the list of national governments when the national government tried to motivate more of a subnational engagement at the beginning. Having learned about this opportunity, Tang persuaded the mayor to reach out to the national government to express Shenzhen's willingness in acting as a pilot to inform national level policymaking, particularly for the carbon emission market system. After submitted all the application materials, Tang also organized a group of experts and took them to EU to learn EU ETS. After coming back from EU, under Tang's leadership, Shenzhen was able to become the first Chinese city to launch carbon emission system, particularly with the first legislation on carbon emission trading, which actually grounded the local government the power to require industrial participation in carbon emission trading in a compulsory way. Therefore, from Shenzhen's case, we see the important role of bridge leaders in mobilize the willingness from the political leaders and also mobilize implementation alliance from key actors, including local legislators, to advance low carbon policy implementation in the city. The another case I want to show you is Xiamen. Xiamen is an environmentally friendly city and a coastal tourist city. I was expecting to learn a lot about Xiamen's low carbon policy progress before I embarked on my trip to the city. But what surprised me is actually Xiamen is not very interested in developing a very robust low carbon policy implementation initiatives. And over the years, it has not really introduced institutional measures as Shenzhen did. So how? So Xiamen actually started its low carbon initiative with the support from the Deputy Director Lin from the Xiamen Construction Administration. Lin successfully supported Xiamen's application and make Xiamen as one of the first low carbon city pilot in China. But he was not able to mobilize continued political support from the top leader or mobilize implementation alliance from key actors inside and outside the government, including some of the major initiatives he proposed, such as the Jimei New Town program in Xiamen's low carbon city action plan. So from here, you can see that Lin acted as the bridge leader supporting Xiamen's successful application to become one of the key low carbon city pilots in China. Soon after Xiamen being selected as the pilot, the administrative authority of low carbon city program implementation transferred to Xiamen Development and Reform Commission, in which there is no bureaucrats really care about low carbon initiatives. So after the new mayor took the office with a new strategy called the Beautiful Xiamen Initiative, low carbon city program basically shelved by the government. So we see that with insufficient support from more of the region leadership, local areas and the regions, including those environmental friendly cities, can encounter implementation challenges in implementing low carbon initiatives. So in conclusion, my research shows that even in a centralized political system like China, local areas and the regions have demonstrated diversity in engaging in low carbon policy experimentation. In contrast to conventional criticism towards the lacking of policy institutionalization during the experimentation, my research shows that low carbon policy institutionalization occurs when there is a local bridging leadership. Therefore, my research emphasized the importance for the government to keep investing in bridging leadership, particularly the mid-level bureaucrats, in enhancing local low carbon policy implementation, because those bureaucrats are at the front line of shaping China's climate governance and its effectiveness in delivering its climate goals. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Isabel Varela, and I'm excited to introduce to you today the first open source database for network ground source heat pump systems, or geothermal networks for short. So first of all, why do we need these geothermal networks? The map here on the top left is a map of the gas distribution system here in the Boston area. And this is quite an old piping system that some of it goes as far back as the 1800s. And because of that, it is quite leaky, which means that there are unintended methane emissions coming from the system. The map here in the middle actually shows the location of some of these gas leaks in the Boston area. And there's an issue not only for health, for climate, but also costs. So the map here on the top right shows where these piping system needs to be replaced or repaired. And it is estimated that it will cost around $40 billion to fix this piping system in the next 20 years. So why invest a large amount of capital in a gas system that will be at odds with our 2050 decarbonization targets? And why not instead use this capital to build a clean heating and cooling system for the state? So first of all, when we talk about geothermal energy, it can be very ambiguous because depending on the temperature that you get from the earth, the technologies and the uses are different. So here on the left, we see for electricity generation, we need very high temperatures that can be upwards of 250 Fahrenheit. And you would need wells that go very deep, even larger than a mile. For the geodistrict, for heating only, you also need very deep wells and temperatures that are still very high that can go to 200 Fahrenheit. But what we're going to be talking about today are shallow geothermal networks. So these are ground source heat pumps, but they are interconnected. So it's not a ground source heat pump that is for a single building, as shown here on the left, but an interconnected network of ground source heat pumps where several buildings around a neighborhood are connected to the same geothermal network. So these are much shallower wells that can reach temperatures of 55 degrees Fahrenheit here in Massachusetts. And they can be of depths around 500 to 700 feet deep. So how do these heat pumps work? So at a very high level, for example, as it starts to get really hot in the summer, there is a piping system that is a closed loop system. And it has water circulating through that piping system, and it will move the heat from the buildings to the subsurface in the summer. And as the water circulates through the subsurface, then that water is cooled and then can be used for cooling the buildings. And in the winter, it's basically the other way around. We will move heat from the subsurface into the buildings. And with the heat pumps, then you can reach the temperatures that you want in the building. So these networked geothermal systems are much more efficient than just having single ground source heat pumps at each building. So how does this work? Imagine you have a data center that is rejecting heat year round. And this heat then can then be used by the other buildings down the street. So then you get cancellation, or you meet your thermal needs or at least partially, even before tapping into the boreholes. So this makes the overall system very efficient. So there's this synchronous cancellation of thermal needs that improves efficiency. And there's also the asynchronous or thermal energy storage that you can get throughout the seasons. So for example, in the summer, when most of the buildings are rejecting heat, and that heat is then stored in the subsurface, then this heat can then be used in the winter. And it makes, again, the system more efficient. So why now? Why use these geothermal networks now? So there is a momentum, and there's a combination of different factors for this. First, there's a study that came out very recently on December 6th from the Department of Energy, led by Oak Ridge National Laboratory, that shows if you had 70% of buildings in the US with ground source heat pumps, what would be the impact not only on emissions, but also on the electric grid? And it shows that we would save from building 410 gigawatts of electric capacity in the nation. You would also save 43,000 miles of transmission lines that you would not have to build when compared to other electrification systems. These 43,000 miles is similar to crossing the US 16 times from east to west coast. So that is significant. There's also momentum in terms of the regulatory changes that need to happen and are happening right now. So gas utility companies are restricted in that they can only provide gas to their customers. So legislation needs to change so that they can actually pursue these network ground source heat pump systems as a way to decarbonize their business. And the reason that it's been looked at as an option to do this is because gas utility companies, they can really scale this system up. They installed the current gas system and they can scale these network geothermal systems at city, state, or national scales. And in fact, on December 6th, also, there was the so-called 2080 docket that came out in Massachusetts, where the Department of Public Utilities are actually mandating gas utilities to pursue these network geothermal systems before investing capital into the existing gas infrastructure. And the pilot projects are on the way, and Massachusetts is leading the way. There are a number of pilot projects that have been approved, and most significantly, the very first one in Framingham, Massachusetts, started operations when the ribbon cutting ceremony was just last June 4th. There are other pilot projects that are in the design phase and that will start construction by next year in Lowell, Massachusetts, and in Dorchester in Franklin Field in the Boston area. So what I want to introduce to you today is this database for these network ground source heat pump systems. So even though we are at the beginning stage of these pilot projects, they are expected to increase nationally. So what we want to do is from the start, set the stage as to what are the parameters that should be recorded in this database. So it's a public data bank to capture technical and non-technical knowledge about these systems. So why are we proposing to do this? It is to inform and facilitate future developments. So for the benefit of communities that are doing feasibility studies or thinking of doing feasibility studies or are in the design phase of these systems, but also to inform policy as regulation for these systems is in the early stages. So what I'm proposing here are what are the parameters that should be captured in this database. So here I group them into these 9 different categories. So the parameters related to the buildings, to the boreholes or sources and sinks, to the system performance, the coefficient of performance of the system, parameters that are related to the main loop in terms of the emissions that are being avoided, the properties of the subsurface, the costs of each stage, the energy you use, and also the demographics, who is benefiting from these systems. So these parameters can also be classified in terms of basically 3 main groups for these geothermal networks: the buildings or the end user, the main loop or the distribution system, and the thermal sources, or basically the upstream part of this system. So now we'll go into each one of these and look at these parameters in a little bit more detail. So when we think about thermal sources and sinks, traditionally we think about boreholes, but they can also be lakes or ponds or rivers, for example. But even when thinking about boreholes, we can look at, we want to capture if these are vertical boreholes in a more traditional geometrical setting like a grid, or if they are deviated boreholes that have a smaller footprint. at the surface. We want to look at the number of boreholes, the geometry of the layout. How is the heat exchanger for these boreholes? For example, is it a U-tube, which is the more traditional method, or do we have a coaxial geometry? And what is the material that is being used for these systems? For example, here in the bottom right, you can see that is the U-tubes that were used in the pilot project in Framingham in the subsurface. And we're also looking at the other properties of the subsurface, like temperature, conductivity, and the costs that are related in each one of these stages. Costs related to drilling, for the horizontal trenching. And now, as we move and look at the distribution system or the main loop, we want to capture what is the length of the main loop, what is the fluid that is being traveling, that is being used as the heat transfer fluid. Is it 100% water? Does it have glycol or other material? And what is the percentage of that? What is the design temperature for that main loop? And also we're looking at the number of buildings, the number of bore fields that we have, and the number of pumps that are being used to circulate the water. We're also looking at costs at this stage and the demographics in terms of, is this an environmental justice community? When we look at now at each building, there's information that we want for each particular building. For example, what is the building type? What is the weatherization that is needed for this building? What is the occupancy of the building? And we're also capturing what was the previous heating system in order to calculate what are the emissions that are being avoided, what are the type of appliances that are being replaced. For some of the pilot projects, the projects are aiming for full electrification. So that is significant. And whether, for example, there's a heat exchanger at every building. And now I want to briefly mention about the very first pilot project. So it is data from these projects that are being used to populate that database. So this is the very first in the nation utility-led retrofit geothermal network, and it's located here in Framingham, Massachusetts. It is 1 mile of pipe, main pipe, that is shown here on the green line. It serves 37 buildings. Most of them are residential. 31 of them are residential buildings, but there's also commercial buildings. There's a school, a gas station, a fire station. And there are 3 bore fields, which are shown here in those locations. So one is in the parking lot of the school, another one is in the parking lot of the fire department, and another one is in a cul-de-sac. It serves about 140 individual customers, as some of these buildings are apartment buildings. They're actually from the Framingham Housing Authority. There are 88 boreholes throughout the 3 bore fields. And this is a 2-year pilot project, and the startup was, again, just this last week. So how is the outlook of these geothermal networks for the state of Massachusetts? So HEAT, a nonprofit, has received funding from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and is funding the feasibility stage of 13 communities in the state that are shown here in this map to do these geothermal networks. So what about nationally? What is the outlook nationally for these systems? The Department of Energy has funded 11 communities in different states that are shown here in yellow to pursue the feasibility and design phase of these systems. And there are also, some of the existing networks. So these geothermal networks have existed traditionally in university campuses. For example, Colorado Mesa University has a system that has been running since 2008, and it's very efficient. So what about legislation? Here we see the states where legislation has already passed, where gas utility companies are already allowed to pursue these systems, and the states that have filed legislation or that are considering doing that. So there's progress on that front as well. And we have interest from the gas utility companies. So there's a coalition of gas utility companies that are interested in doing these systems. And overall, there's 23 of them that came together. When you look at the total amount of gas customers that they serve, that is 50% of the gas customers in the US. And 15 of those gas utility companies came to visit the pilot project here in Framingham, Massachusetts. So one thing that we're doing is collecting interest about these systems to inform policymakers. If you're interested in having one of these geothermal networks on your street, you can use this QR code to sign up and express your interest on that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Charles Hua, and I am an alumna of Harvard College, and it's my honor to be presenting here at the Harvard Climate Action Week at the studio. So today I'll be talking about how we can accelerate clean energy and equity through utility regulation. So first, why does this topic matter? Well, if you're one of the 200 million folks who have used ChatGPT, you might know how revolutionary of a technology artificial intelligence is. But you might not know how much electricity AI uses. In fact, it's driving significant increases in electricity demand, and that's putting a strain on our current electric grid. So let's take a look at what's happening in Georgia, for instance. You have Georgia Power, which is the utility company in Georgia. There is so much investment in data centers, AI, and manufacturing that the grid can't handle it down there. Because there is so much of an increase in electricity demand, there needs to be an increase in electricity supply to meet that demand. Now, how is the utility Georgia Power looking at increasing the supply of electricity? Well, next, it's looking to natural gas. So in October 2023, Georgia's utility developed what's called an interim integrated resource plan, which basically is a plan that spells out how the utility intends to invest its capital expenditures. And so Georgia says with Georgia's utility that it needs to generate more electricity using natural gas. Now that poses a significant threat to its own climate and emissions reduction goals. Georgia Power being a utility that has a net zero goal. Now, fast forward to April 2024, just 2 months ago, and Georgia Power received approval to add 1,400 megawatts of natural gas generation. And there's a lot of environmentalists who are criticizing the approval that the regulatory body, the Georgia Public Service Commission, made to allow for the utility to build all this new fossil fuel generation. Now, there's other reasons beyond climate impacts to be concerned about what's happening with Georgia Power. There's also affordability concerns, where building that natural gas is going to cost Georgian ratepayers a lot of money, particularly as we've seen there's high volatility in gas prices, where, for instance, with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, gas prices spike significantly. And so who ultimately will shoulder the risk of those cost increases? Well, it's the ratepayers in Georgia. But there's also reliability concerns. You know, we've seen, for instance, just in the US, Winter Storm Uri, Winter Storm Elliott cause significant blackouts and substantial strain on the electricity grid. Part of why that is that a lot of the gas units didn't work as the utility expected. And so that's a problem. But ultimately, the final decision was made, and the regulatory body for the monopoly utility in Georgia ultimately allowed the utility to proceed with essentially everything that it asked for. Now, this is not just unique to Georgia. This is part of a nationwide trend. Again, as we use more electricity, we need more supply for that electricity. And so there's a lot of utilities across the country that are looking to meet that demand with new fossil fuel build through these gas plants. So just 5 utilities, so Duke Energy, North Carolina, Dominion Energy, largely in Virginia, Arizona Public Service in Arizona, We Energies in Wisconsin, and Georgia Power in Georgia. Just these 5 utilities are looking to build nearly 25,000 megawatts of gas. Now, one of 2 things will happen. They'll be built, and if they're used, that puts the United States emissions reduction and climate goals out of reach. And if they're not built, then the utilities will have invested significant capital expenditures in something that ultimately the ratepayers will have to pay, and that will create stranded asset risks for Georgian ratepayers. neither of which is a great scenario. Now, if we look at a broader trend, we are not on track to meet our clean energy targets. So if you look at the last 6 years, the historic levels of clean energy deployment have been roughly 25 gigawatts of clean electricity capacity. There are teams that have modeled both where we need to go in terms of future clean electricity deployment, as well as forecasted clean energy additions after the passage of the landmark Inflation Reduction Act legislation. But there is a tripling of that pace of clean energy deployment that we need just in these next 5 years or this end of the decade to meet what's forecasted. So why the gap? Well, a lot of it is on the regulatory side of the equation. We have policies like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. From a financing standpoint, we have significantly more capital and investment flowing to clean energy technologies. From a technology standpoint, these technologies have substantially improved and the costs have come down significantly. But from a regulatory standpoint, there are still a lot of regulatory barriers to the accelerated deployment of clean energy. That includes anything from the need for permitting reform. So how do we permit and site these clean energy projects? That includes what's called interconnection queues. So to build these clean energy projects, there are long lines that the entities building those projects have to wait in before they can get their projects connected onto the grid. And then there are regulatory bottlenecks at the state level in terms of the approval of these clean energy projects. So let's talk about some of those. But in the meantime, while we have this climate and clean energy crisis, we have an affordability and equity crisis, where nearly 1 in 3 Americans struggle to pay their energy bills. That means that they're foregoing basic necessities like education, food, shelter sometimes, just to be able to afford turning on the lights. And a lot of utilities have shut them off of the system. Even the elderly, even those suffering from medical conditions, even during extreme conditions, be it natural disasters or pandemics. And so there's a mismatch here where we have utilities and utility companies that are making record profits all at the same time that 1 in 3 Americans can't afford their energy bills. So what's causing a lot of this? Well, a lot of it is the regulatory system, where the regulators for these utilities are routinely approving fossil fuel projects that have particularly harmed low-income and environmental justice communities. This isn't just a regional trend, this is a national trend with Alabama, West Virginia, Michigan, Georgia. And a lot of the time, the regulatory bodies have not helped ratepayers, whether it's approving rate hikes, allowing utilities to increase their expenditures to ultimately earn greater returns. And there have been various scandals as a result of this. Yet because very few people know what a public utility commission is, oftentimes these bodies, both the regulators and the utilities, comprise the system that ultimately has not been subject to the level of accountability that's necessary to make sure that ultimately it's the ratepayers that are protected moving forward, in addition to the potential climate and clean energy implications. So what are these bodies, these public utility commissions? Well, every state has them. They regulate the investor-owned utilities in your area. These utilities are not public companies. They're actually private companies that are investor-owned. They're monopolies that were granted by the state. And these regulators are there to make sure that the utilities are doing their job. Econ 101 says that if you have a monopoly, you need a regulator. And that's the public utility commissions. Now, they're the guardians of an equitable clean energy transition because they oversee our energy bills. Next, how much our utilities invest in clean energy versus fossil fuels, and where these projects are located. Next. So that means that the 200 people, the 200 public utility commissioners across the country, oversee nearly $200 billion in annual utility spending, a number that's only going to grow. Now that comes out to about $1 billion per commissioner. And again, every state has one. You can look up who your public utility commissioner is, and that person, that set of people, each one oversees nearly $1 billion in utility spending, and that's just capital expenditures. Now, how is that broken down? Well, your electricity bills go to pay for a range of components of the electricity system. That includes the electricity generation. So those are the solar, wind, coal, natural gas, and nuclear plants that power the electricity system that allow you to turn on your lights. It's also the distribution expenses, which are the local poles and wires in your neighborhood. It's the transmission system, which is the long poles and wires that you see along highways. And it's gas. For instance, with continuous build out of gas pipelines. Now, all of these components are growing in cost, except for generation. And that's precisely because clean energy has gotten so cheap that it's now cheaper in the vast majority of instances than continuously operating existing fossil fuel plants, such as coal. But these regulators need to make sure that the balance of these investments is such that you, as the ratepayer, are ultimately protected. And so that's why it matters for you to pay attention to who your public utility commissioner is. Oops, go back. So what do we do about this? How do we address the electricity challenges that I talked about earlier with all this increased demand in electricity due to artificial intelligence, due to manufacturing, due to electric vehicles and heat pump adoption? Well, the good news is that we have a range of solutions at our disposal. So if you look at that blue bar on the right, that is the forecasted growth in peak electricity demand moving forward. So it's about 90 gigawatts. Now, the range of 8 technologies on the left in green there represent solutions that we have at our disposal today that don't require further technological innovation or new inventions that will allow us to address that increase in demand without needing to build expensive new fossil fuel plants and mitigating the need to build new transmission, which we still need to do a lot more of, particularly those transmission lines that cross states. But let's just take a look at these 8 technologies and what do they do? So the first 4, they unlock effective transmission capacity. Now, that's a fancy way of saying that these 4 technologies, if we deploy them at scale all across the country, all across the poles and wires that are scattered across the country, if we deploy those, they're going to be able to allow us to meet that increased electricity demand simply by connecting the different electricity generating units across the country, be it the wind farms in Iowa and Kansas, solar farms in Georgia or Arizona, to the places that need them the most, which are those metropolitan areas that are gobbling up significant electricity demand. And the great thing about these technologies is that they're cheap. They will save you, in many instances, money on your electricity bills, particularly the 3 in the middle there: dynamic line rating, topology optimization, and advanced power flow control. Now, without getting into the weeds of what these technologies do, basically what they do is at low capex, if you deploy them, they make the system a lot more efficient. It runs better. More electricity can be sent through those poles and wires. and it'll save you as a ratepayer money. Now, who's in charge of making sure that they're deployed? Well, it's the utilities and it's the regulators, those public utility commissioners that I mentioned. And same thing for the 4 lime green technologies in the middle there. They will create relief on our grid system that is increasingly strained without the need to build significant new poles and wires to the same degree as you would without deploying these technologies. And so that's why they're called often non-wires investments. So that's things like energy storage. That's things like virtual power plants, which are aggregations of your rooftop solar, your neighbor's electric vehicle, your church's heat pumps. It pools it together and then serves effectively as a new power plant. That's why it's called a virtual power plant. That is cheaper, cleaner, reduces your electricity bills, that can improve the reliability of the system and help us address the challenges that are facing the grid. So let's go back to those public utility commissioners, the pesky regulators that will determine whether or not we advance an affordable, a reliable, and a sustainable electricity system. So what can you do about this? Well, there's 3 things in particular that I would call out. First is you can push for the appointment and election of good utility commissioners. Again, everybody in the United States has 3, 5, or 7 people in that state that serve in these roles that are setting their electricity bills, determining how the utilities are investing in different forms of energy, determining and overseeing whether the utilities are looking out for you and advancing the public interest. And in 40 states, either the governor, usually the governor, sometimes the state legislature appoints those commissioners. And in the other 10 states, they're elected. So you can look up your public utility commission and see whether it's appointed or elected, and make sure that the people that are serving in those roles are truly there to look out for you. The second thing that you can do is to call up your state legislator and tell them that they need to make sure that they are looking out for you, that they're looking and holding the public utility commissions accountable, but also empowering those public utility commissions to do their job effectively. Now, a lot of these public utility commissions are significantly under-resourced, understaffed. They have some of the hardest jobs in the world, but that's where the state legislators can come in by giving them more resources, more budgets, and more tools to be able to advance utility regulatory reform and make sure that your energy bills are as low as possible and that the energy generation on the system is as clean as possible. And the last thing is to engage in these proceedings. These are largely public venues. It's called the Public Utilities Commission. But find a group, perhaps your neighbors, perhaps your local church group or environmental group or your parent-teacher union, and engage with these proceedings. Your voice needs to be heard because you are the ones that are paying the energy bills that are that result in the utilities and their investments. And the public utility commissioners need to fundamentally make sure that your interests are constantly being not only protected, but advanced. And that's only possible if you engage in these public utility commission proceedings. If you're interested in these topics, you can reach out to me at charles.hua, H-U-A, the number 2 @gmail.com. And I'm always excited to talk more about the need and opportunities for reforming the utility regulatory system. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing what you all do.